You hate ads? I hate ads. You know what I like? Patreon.com/inkdependence keeps this channel ad-free. Hello folks, welcome to Inkdependence. I'm Mike, and this is the Schon DSGN Monoc Nib, which is a really special thing, and I kind of want to talk about it a bit here today. I will try to keep it short, but it probably won't be because we got a lot to talk about. So my plan is we'll talk about the features of this nib, compare it to the sort of JoWo stuff that it is, as you'll be more familiar with. We'll put it in the pin it came in, and then we'll write with it and a bunch of other pins to show sort of how this one works and feels and compares to various sizes. So first off, this is called the Monoc because it is a monocoque design, which refers to things that are a body that is all one piece, right? So you'll have race cars and that sort of thing, which are monocoque designs, are all one piece. And this is one piece of grade 5 titanium, starts its life off as a big old rod and turns into a nib eventually. You'll notice that the profile here is quite different to something like your usual JoWo number 6 nib, although these are more or less interchangeable in a lot of pens. Maybe not all of them. Do be careful when putting this in other pens and such, because while this has plastic threads and whatnot, this is all metal, and so if you put it in wrong or get it cross-threaded or, I don't know, screw it into a plastic section perhaps and you use too much force, metal is not as forgiving as plastic, and you might do some damage to your pen, although I don't know if you would damage the nib. This thing is pretty tough. Now, along here, you'll see that the profile is very different. The nib tipping profile is different, and that's because there's no tipping on here, so to speak. These nibs are a piece of steel with a bit of what they call iridium welded to the front. It's not really iridium. It's some alloy of a whole bunch of stuff that used to be iridium, but I don't think they really use iridium in these things anymore. But since that's a blob, you're kind of limited in how you're going to shape it. But this is just this is one piece. This whole thing is all one piece, and so he could do anything he wants with this nib tipping size, and I think he will in the future. Currently, the Monoc comes in one size, and it is this one, which is sort of a broad medium kind of size. Maybe just a straight up broad is kind of the size here, but we'll compare it to a bunch of things here soon. Now, looking up here at the top of the nib, you'll see there's a very nice nib slit going down here. No breather hole. You don't really need that. That's actually just a little blob of ink I got on my fingers when I took it out of the pen. You'll see here an O-ring, which keeps ink from going back this way or this way, sort of keeps things separate. If you decide to eyedropper this, which you could, but also I don't really recommend that because it will be super wet. It's already a pretty wet nib, and adding just the force of all that ink behind it, I think would make it too wet, but that's just me. You'll see here at the top, it says Schon right there, and each of these little letters is anodized in a different color because that's the option that I selected at checkout when I bought this in its very first batch. That's the rainbow version, and that must have taken a lot of time all by itself. And then on the bottom, you have a little purple star, which is, I think, probably going to be the glyph for all of this first run, but I don't really know what Ian's plans are for that. And my star is purple. The feed in here is also custom designed and manufactured and finished in Ian's shop in Philly. And it is, as you can see there, a little bit translucent. This is ultem. This is amber ultem. You can also get it in black. Amber ultem is the same kind of material as this, right? So when there's not ink in there, it's more or less this color. But I have a nice dark teal ink in there, and so you can see it's really kind of showing through a little bit. I like a nice translucent or transparent feed. I think that looks cool. All right, the grind on here is very specific to this nib and is not going to be like the other things you probably have in your house. The flat spot, the writing surface up here is a little bit different. It is tuned so you can write with the top, which gives you a different line weight. It's just, it's a very interesting nib, and I've liked it a lot. I've put at least 3 converters full of ink through it. In fact, this is the dregs of the third. I'm going to go ahead and change ink colors next because I mean, like, why not, right? I've used this ink for 3 converters. I want to see something new. Let me put this in a pen real quick, and we'll, take a look at it there. The way you put it in is the same way that you would insert any sort of number 6 nib or housing or whatever into a section. You just kind of put it in there, screw it down. I'm trying not to get too much ink on my fingers. We'll see how it goes. There we go. All right, I think we're good. Yeah. Okay, so that is now screwed in there, and you'll see this section is a nice matte black one. This is the pen that it comes with natively. You can get this nib on different pens from Ian, although it does cost a bit more. He has worked in some of the, cost differences and that sort of thing into the pen. So the one that you will get natively with this nib is a really nice matte black. I have several of these Schon design full-size fountain pens. You'll have seen these. I recently launched one with Ian. The Cheerio water pen was a full-size Schon. I'm a big fan of this size. I haven't actually put this nib in anything else yet because I like this so much. Okay, so that's kind of the same as you would do with this, although, obvious differences in the nibs themselves. So let's go ahead and write with this compared to a bunch of other nibs, just so we can get a feel for what it's like, because it is unique. All right, let's see if this writes. I have been waving it around for probably half an hour or something at this point, so let's write this a few times just so I can intersperse the different nibs next to them. So this is the first one, and you can see that the line weight when writing with it in normal style is fairly heavy, and it is a fairly wet sort of pen, but when you flip it over, you get a much finer line, and I find this is really useful for using in my planners and such, because often I don't have a whole lot of room to write with, and flipping it over can give me something like a fine, maybe an extra fine sort of line. Okay, so you see I've written it several times. I have a bunch of nibs to sort of show next to this one, and so I wanted to give you a real easy way to compare them next to one another. Okay, so let's start off with a JoWo medium. This is a Diplomat Arrow. And we'll use I have here an Aurora medium just to sort of show how that looks. Then let's do this one has a Bock medium, I'm fairly sure, but also Bock doesn't label their nibs, and so I can't really be sure. Now let's go for this one. This has a JoWo broad in it. Next up, this has a titanium nib in it from Bock, which is one that we need to compare because they're both titanium, but super different. This is a Pilot Custom 845 with a number 15 size double broad. And lastly, and just for fun, this is a Fude nib that is from franklin-christoph. And there we go. Now we can see a whole lot of differences going on between these, but interspersed here, nib sizes are kind of all over the place between brands, right? So this JoWo broad right here looks a lot like that Schon Monoc does. Also, the Aurora medium here looks a lot like the Schon Monoc. This JoWo medium is thinner. The Fude nib is kind of extremes on both sides, just like the Monoc is, which gives you an interesting thing there. This Pilot double broad is bigger than the Monoc for sure. And then here, the Bock Titanium Fine is an extremely different nib to the rest of these. And that actually tried to bleed through there a little bit. But the Bock Titanium Fine, I think, is actually about the same, maybe a little bit broader than the Schon Monoc, which is kind of broader than the rest. So these Bock Ti Fines are something we need to talk about real quick. And the thing about these nibs is that they are fairly squishy. They're extremely wet, just like the Monoc is. But as you can see, if I just put a little bit of pressure there against my fingernail, it spreads, and you can see it is kind of squishy. And a lot of people will treat this as if it's a flex nib, and it is not really a flex nib. It can get bent out of shape and sprung fairly easily, so do be careful with these. But the Monoc nib doesn't do that at all. So if I were to poke this against my fingernail, thusly, you'll see nothing. This is a pretty stiff nib. It is kind of a nail. I would not push on it. I think the amount of pressure that it would take to deform this would maybe permanently deform it, and I wouldn't do that. You're not going to want to do that to this nib. So yeah, this gives you a lot of interesting sort of comparisons for these nib sizes, and I think that's very interesting. So this is not going to be a pen that you are probably going to consistently write with the top side with, because it's not super comfortable. I mean, it is like a fine or an extra fine, so you get a little bit more feedback and that sort of thing. And also, maybe you're like me, and it just kind of feels weird to flip a nib over like this. I don't know why. I'm just so used to using it in this direction that when I flip it over a nib like this, it feels odd. Also, I'll say the rest of these don't actually write upside down, except for maybe the Fude. This one will, but it's it's about that fine anyway. So that's kind of getting two nib sizes for one, which is pretty neat. Oh, I should say the other thing that people have asked me about is that a lot of folks have said that it feels kind of like a pencil in terms of feedback, and you hear that sort of thing about like a platinum nib sometimes, or pencils themselves, and so I got curious about that, and I was trying out a bunch of them, and it turns out that this Blackwing matte is the only one that's kind of close, and that is their softest possible core, and it's it does have a little bit of the same kind of feedback. You do feel the nib on the paper with the Monoc, which is nice, and you do feel this one, although being the softest, you don't get a lot of it. It's much smoother than your average like HB or number 2 pencil nib. Pencil graphite, but kind of like this ultra soft matte from Blackwing. And lastly, some folks have asked how it feels on different papers, and so this one is a very smooth paper. This is from Right Pads. I really like this paper. It's very good. This one is a Moroman Soho series sketch pad, and this has a whole lot of texture to it, as you can see. Right in there. So a whole bunch of texture on one side. The other side is much smoother, but this side, you can see what's going on there. And so if you have a pen like this Fude, which is broad but very flat on the bottom, I just kind of scribble across, you can see that it misses the paper quite a lot because it's sort of writing over the tops of those ridges in the paper. The Monoc nib doesn't really behave that way. As you can see here, I don't actually really even feel those ridges in the paper. I think the nib is firm enough or something, and wet enough, I suppose, to just sort of ride right across it. Similarly to a broad nib like this one, which doesn't really have any problem. Although I will say, just having just done that, the Monoc is smoother that way than this broad nib is. And as you get smaller and smaller with the nibs, or you start using grinds and that sort of thing, you will get different feelings on the paper, and some of them will sort of skip over the top and others won't. But with the Monoc, which is the second line, yeah, no problems at all. It feels nice, it writes well, puts down plenty of ink, all that jazz. So, as I was saying before, this is a fairly wet nib, and so you'll want to make intentional decisions with regard to what ink you put in here. I have franklin-christoph ink 23 in here, which is a pretty medium ink, and it flows pretty wetly, but it is a wet nib, so if you put a wet ink in there, like your, Aurora blacks and that sort of thing, you're going to end up with a fire hose, and you might have a bad time. So I would put in sort of medium flow or even a drier ink, and this will really sort of make your day. Also, since you can't really, or rather should not, remove the feed on these, I wouldn't put shimmers through it just because you won't be able to clean it out as thoroughly as you might like, because you can't really take it apart. And so I just wouldn't do it. Although I really want to, because it feels like it would be the kind of ink or the kind of nib that would have just a great flow and give me a whole bunch of shimmer. But like, I just also don't want to deal with that. I put my shimmer inks in things I can take apart if I need to, and clean thoroughly, because I don't know, I'm kind of particular about that. So I would say medium or drier flow inks are going to be better in here, and not your wet flow inks. All right, so the last thing is, of course, the price. We have to talk about that a little bit, because this is not an inexpensive pen. So with this pen body and this nib, it goes for $400 on Ian's site, and that is not inexpensive. That's not a casual purchase, and I get it. Also, these pens, if you just buy them with a regular nib, are about $200. So the nib is essentially a $200 upgrade to this awesome matte black pen. You can also, I think right now on his site, get a code which will let you purchase this pen and then get another body, and there is an additional cost, and I forget exactly what the structure is, but do keep in mind that it's not a $400 nib that you're buying. You're buying a $400 pen with a body and all that. He does not sell the nibs separately, and if he did, I think they would be expensive, just because he's building in some cost adjustments to get people into using these nibs and that sort of thing in a pen. And so I think this nib is going to cost more than $200. Having talked to people who do machining and that sort of thing, they're like, that's $400 is low. So is that a high price? Yeah, but it's also a whole lot of work to turn a bar of titanium into an awesome custom-made, shaped, independently designed, sort of piece of art that you can write with awesomely. This is a great nib. So I love it, and I bought it in the first round. There was no hesitation. I have a very low order number. So thank you very much to all my patrons who make purchases like this possible, frankly. And, you know, thanks to Ian for making such a cool thing for the pen community to use and to like push pens and such forward. So keep an eye out for these. You'll definitely be able to try these out at pen shows and that sort of thing that Ian is intending. So, you know, keep an eye out for this. Try it out. And if this sounds as cool to you as it did to me, this is kind of an insta-buy. But I hope you've learned something. If you have questions, hit me up down below and I'll try to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I'll ask Ian and maybe we can get that going because I do know Ian pretty well. He is a friend of mine. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I'll see you in another video. And until then, peace out.